Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Koepp, co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values. And we're looking forward to today's webinar on the HR trends of today and tomorrow. But before we get started, I wanted to share one of our upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you. On Tuesday, October 26th, we'll be hosting a webinar called Judging the Relevance of Skills Credentials, hosted in partnership with AARP. At a time of increased emphasis on upskilling and reskilling, we think this is a really timely topic. This webinar will seek to answer the question, is your diversity and inclusion recruiting strategy inclusive to all ages? Our expert panelists will talk about the importance of understanding the credentials marketplace and share practices from employers on how they're approaching this challenge to ensure they're not missing out on exceptional talent and opportunities. There's a link in the chat space right now where you can go and register. Please take a look at that. And now on to today's webinar. Our title is HR Trends in 2021, Key Takeaways for HR Leaders. Much has been said of the massive changes to the way we work during the last 2 years. Less clear, though, is where it all leaves HR experts as they build the futures of their companies. In this conversation, our expert speakers will break down the year's most notable trends in areas like employee support, diversity and inclusion, performance management, and employee retention. Looking past the headlines, they'll tell how these trends should inform your work into 2022 and beyond. Now, before we dive into this topic, we'd like to thank our partners, Bravely and Achievers. I'll tell you a little bit more about them. Bravely connects your people to on-demand confidential coaching in the moments that define the employee experience. Access to Bravely's network of vetted professional coaches fosters employee well-being and development to supercharge performance and help people thrive at work. When leading organizations offer Bravely to everyone, they scale the support offered by their people teams, and they transform their cultures in an evolving world of work. Now, Achievers, employee voice and recognition solutions, bring your organization's values and strategy to life. With Achievers, you can activate employee participation and fuel a culture of performance so you can experience data-driven business results. And now, a few quick logistical items before we get rolling with our conversation. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. So look out for an email in about a day with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. You can also look out for a written account of this conversation soon on our website at fromdayone.co. And at the top of the hour, we'll begin a Q&A session where you can submit your questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Patrick Cole. Pat is a Brooklyn-based journalist, editor, and consultant. He's covered subjects ranging from philanthropy and culture to technology and terrorism. He's worked as a staff correspondent for both Businessweek and Time magazines. He's been a national correspondent for the Chicago Tribune and a reporter and TV interviewer at Bloomberg News. Recently, he served as associate content director at Atlantic Media's Content Studio. He also happens to be a graduate of Notre Dame and UCLA Law School and teaches at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism. That's City University of New York. Pat, okay, over to you to hear about our speakers.
Okay. Good afternoon and good morning if you're out on the West Coast, and welcome to our panel on HR trends in 2021. It goes without saying that in the past 19 months, COVID has had a deep and profound impact on everything, all aspects of our lives, and especially the workplace. And HR specialists and managers are in the eye of this hurricane. And our panelists today who come from that world will give us some deep insight into these the trends and what the future holds for HR as well. I'd like to and first let's meet our panel. We'll just go around our virtual room and have everybody introduce themselves. I'll let them say what their job title is and what they do. Let's begin with Shahina.
Thank you very much, and pleasure to be starting off this conversation, a very exciting topic, and thanks for having me here. I represent Zensar Technologies. It's a technology services and consulting organization with presence in about 33 global locations and with employee base of more than 10,000, as we call them, associates around the globe. We partner with about 200 enterprises, and they rely on us to be disruptive, agile, and innovative. So again, glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, next, Sarah Bravely. Excuse me, Sarah Sheehan. I'm sorry, I was, I read my notes. My apologies. Sarah Sheehan.
My name. Hi, no worries, Pat. Hi, everyone. I am Sarah Sheehan. Thank you for having me today. I'm the co-founder and president of Bravely. Steve shared a little bit about what we do, but for those of you that aren't familiar, we're redefining how coaching is offered inside organizations. So the difference in Bravely, or the differentiator, is that we go population wide. We really believe in this idea of providing equitable access to resources that historically have only been available to the most senior people inside organizations. So we work with companies like Zillow Group, Autodesk, the New York Times, Pinterest, but every employee at those companies has access to our coaching. Very excited to be here today and share more about what we're hearing from our clients and their people.
Okay, next let's hear from Ruth.
Hi, thank you for including me today. I'm Ruth Tilly. I'm the Vice President of HR Business Partner supporting corporate functions for McKesson Corporation. McKesson is a Fortune 7 organization. We are primarily known for distribution of healthcare supplies and pharmaceuticals, most commonly known now as the distributor of the COVID vaccine and the kitting required for the vaccines. Been in HR for over 20 years, and glad to be with you guys today.
Great, thank you for that. And Sarah Waltman.
Hi, thank you for having me today as well. So I work with Dentsply Sirona. We're the world's largest manufacturer of professional dental products and technologies. I am the vice president of what I like to call talent enablement, otherwise known as talent management. And I'm excited to participate and learn, and then also share some insights from what we've been experiencing within our organization.
Okay, thank you. And also just want to note for our participants and viewers today, Cheryl Smith, who is the Global Director of Talent Management at Xerox, could not make it today because of a family situation. So our discussion will be with this present group. So let's begin with the questions. A question for all of you. What is the number one issue facing HR right now that perhaps didn't even exist before the pandemic? And let's begin with Ruth on this one.
It's hard to come up with one. And I say that because I believe that what we're experiencing is a perfect storm. And so I'm going to call out the Great Resignation, but the Great Resignation didn't happen in a vacuum. There's so many reasons of why we see that we are trying in HR to solve for. So it's not just the turnover and the lack of candidates available. It's the race to increase our diversity. I think a lot of organizations have realized that they have not put their money where their mouth is, and we've not, increased our numbers in a way that's meaningful, that's really showing that we are making this a priority. Then you've got the burnout. You've got, I was reading an article this weekend from McKinsey that 30% of women since COVID have exited the workplace. So that's 30% less females that we have available to recruit and to develop and to help continue to grow their careers. You've got the stress of all the external environments between COVID and the politicalness of almost every topic, it seems, is now political. And so this is creating a huge amount of stress on people that we need to solve to help them so when they come to work, they can still do their best work, and that we're helping them balance those things. And so I would just say that it's really a combination of a lot of things, but if I had to put one name on it, I would say it's the Great Resignation. And for all of those reasons, that's really challenging. And we in HR are trying to help our business leaders solve for all of those, because as human beings, people are leaving for very different reasons. And so you can't solve for one, you almost have to find out, how do you solve for multiple of these?
Excellent. Shahina, tell us what's the number one issue that you're dealing with right now?
I would say, I think, it's more about reimagining aspects like sustaining culture of the company, employee engagement, productivity management, reimagining all these concepts and making it more suited for a hybrid or remote working model. Pre-pandemic, it was, at least a large part of the workforce was present in offices, and therefore the experience was delivered from one individual, especially for concepts like culture, which were more through artifacts. It was more through, interactions with one another. It was more through, connecting with their managers on a one-on-one basis, group basis. Some of the transparency used to happen. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of new workforce, which is getting added to the organization. It's also to keep up with the growth. It's also to, backfill some of the positions that are becoming open. So in all of this, how does one ensure that, the aspects like culture, aspects like engagement, aspects like motivation, more so in the context of the Great Resignation, these become very, very fundamental and very important to focus on. And how do we deliver that as effectively as we used to do in a physical world? I think, that's something that, is keeping us awake at night.
Okay, thank you. Sarah Waltman.
It's always harder to go after a few have already went, but I would say all of that. And one of the most significant things that we're working on is, how do we prepare our leaders to drive in a human-centered organization? And all the things that we're talking about, resignation or where or how someone gets their work done, if we simply treat our employees as humans and we don't try to cast one-size-fits-all approaches, we'll have a much better outcome as far as retention, engagement, helping people get to their best work. So I think for us, it's really preparing and empowering and coaching our leaders to be able to look at each person as a human with unique needs and see their most significant role as helping them get to their best, versus more leading in a roles-based organization or a casting of a net or a one-size-fits-all.
Okay. And Sarah.
Over a year ago, I was having a conversation with a chief people officer at an enterprise company who said to me, companies are going to learn that post-COVID, employees will now be in the driver's seat. And that has stuck with me. And I think only recently have we really started to see this emerge, right? It's showing up in the Great Resignation. I myself have been conducting interviews recently because we're on a hiring frenzy like most people. And the tone of the conversations are even different. It's what the questions that people are asking about our culture, the things that we offer in terms of their development, the perks and benefits. I've been interviewing and hiring people for over 20 years. It used to be what I did for a living. It's just a completely different ballgame. And so I think what companies are really struggling with, it's kind of a combination of what everyone here has shared, is just this, like, how do we catch up to this if we don't already have the practices or the resources in place? And I've seen it sort of show up as what I call the need for individualized support. So COVID uncovered so much of the differences that we face as people at work. I was a new mother at the beginning of COVID, I was only 3 days back from parental leave when I had to go home and then spend the next 15 months without childcare. And that's very different from some of the challenges that other people faced. I had people on my team lose family members from COVID. I had people have to cancel their weddings. So, but all of that sort of just shined a light on how we need different things. And that we did a great job collectively trying to run around and solve all those problems. And now it's the new normal for HR. And so I actually think the biggest challenge is figuring out how to offer that individualized support that people have grown accustomed to at scale.
Okay, and we'll come back to that topic. I had some questions because it is the ball game has changed between the employees and employer. But one of the things that the COVID has wrought is remote working, and I wanted to start with Shahina to tell us about what's the situation at your company. What portion of your employees work remotely today versus a couple of years ago, let's say?
I would say that, maybe pre-pandemic, we had a 60-40 split where 60% were, working out of offices, 40% were remote, because, our business is such that, we provide services to the customer, and the customer could be, any part of the globe.
Right.
But I would say post-pandemic and, ever since things started becoming normal, we still, I would say 95% of us are still working in a hybrid environment. While the offices have opened and, while that has happened, but we still haven't resumed full-fledged operations, and we don't feel the need for it. 5% of our workforce still needs to be in a physical location because of the work requirements.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think, we really have adapted, and we were one of the companies at a group level. We are part of a conglomerate, and we announced a policy during the pandemic, a policy of working from anywhere, and more dependent on the role, the customer's requirements, to provide that flexibility for managers and the teams to decide how they would like to adapt to the new, the new normal. So I would say that, we are still 95% of us are still working very much in a hybrid mechanism.
Okay. Ruth, and a question I think I'd like for you a couple of you to address as well, that's to continue this conversation. Is remote work here to stay, do you think?
Yeah, I can take that. For McKesson, it is. So when I think about McKesson's population, I kind of break it out into two groups. We've got our distribution centers, which of course cannot be remote. That's where our products are that we've got to pick, pack, and ship. But then you've got a large office presence. And we at McKesson had offices all over the United States. And we have since really determined what our location strategy is. Where do we need offices? How many offices do we really need? And we've done a pretty substantial minimizing of how many offices we have and where they are. We've also rolled out what we call office as a destination. So for office employees, again, excluding our distribution centers, we've rolled out a philosophy of office as a destination. So I am allowed to work from home as much as I need to and want to, but for very specific reasons, I may be asked to come into an office. So if I'm doing a performance review with one of my team members, I have a new hire getting ready to start in a couple of weeks. We will likely meet in the office for a few days just to start to build that relationship. When we have our senior leadership meetings twice a year, we'll go into the office to do those in person. But I can choose to work from home, and so can all the other office employees as well. We have about, I would say 10%, like your the essential employees that need to be on site. Maybe they are processing checks and you can't, unfortunately, we need to do that in person. So there are very specific roles. I would say less than 10% of our office population do need to go into the office on a regular basis, but for everyone else, it is here to stay. We are closing offices, we are minimizing our sizes, and using our office as a destination strategy.
Okay, great. Question for Sarah Waltman, and to kind of continue this again, this conversation. What strategies are emerging for managing managing remote workers? How do you keep them engaged with the company? How do you build camaraderie and to build a cohesive sense of the company's culture so that people feel connected? Give us your thoughts on that.
I think that going into the pandemic, we very much were probably equipped for this in that we operate all over the world, and many of our peers, partners, and teams we hadn't met in person just because of how we're laid out structurally. What I would say is, though, we're building into our processes like performance management or talent reviews, or even recent work we did on our culture, how to effectively engage individuals and making sure that everyone has a chance to get the same in-person experience as they would virtually. So we've done a lot of our previously in-person events virtually and put a great deal of effort into making sure that there was different ways for people to participate. We also published guidelines for what we call best work. Like Ruth, we also have production employees that do have to go into a physical location, and there's other employees within the corporate world as well. So we wanted to give some parameters of what flexibility could look like across the spectrum. And so being sensitive that there are still opportunities for managers to provide flexibility, even for production employees or individuals who are considered deskless and have to come to a physical location or meet with customers. So we've decided to go with guidelines. And again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And we really encourage and empower our managers and our leaders to think through what each individual person needs to do their best work. So I think for us, we probably had a little bit of an advantage going into the situation with technology and some of the ways that we were working together virtually already. But now we know we have to be extra intentional about making sure that it doesn't limit some of our employees from being able to move up in the ranks at the organization or take on different and new responsibilities or promotions because they are virtual. So it's just making sure that there's balance there and we remove any bias from our processes.
Mm-hmm. And Shahina, tell us about the situation at your company. How are you grappling with the management of remote workers?
I think some of the things that we, actually doubled down upon, which existed pre-pandemic, but actually, which got enhanced, we felt the need for it more as we were navigating the pandemic, is things like communication. There never was a more important time to communicate as often as required than through the pandemic era and post, as well as we are navigating hybrid work environments and remote workforce. So apart from that, I think it clearly has brought upon the importance of fostering connections with employees, more so in a hybrid and again a remote work model, because of the use of technology is so much, and the focus can just be on transactions rather than leveraging connections than in a physical environment. And that's something we really feel and we are working on by addressing through coaching, by bringing about initiatives that will strengthen those connections. And that's something that I think even employees look for, and that's a comment that we have received quite often, that they miss those connections ever since we went into a remote environment. Apart from that, I think the focus on skill building, that continues, because more and more being in the technology space, how do we prepare our employees to be future ready? That's something that became of importance, and it became a lot more of a necessity for an organization to focus on, to ensure that employees are always current. They always have a set of skills which makes them relevant as a workforce member. So I think these are some of the things that we have really doubled down upon in the post-pandemic era, and that we feel is very essential for engagement as well as retention.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it's a good point. Upskilling, coaching employees. That's a big trend, and Sarah Sheehan's company Bravely is right in the thick of that. Your company provides coaching on demand for employees, and I'm wondering what is the biggest need of some of the employees that you counsel? Where is the area that they need help the most on?
Yeah. So we saw throughout the last year a 700% increase in sessions around stress and burnout. So coaching is an interesting, I think, solution for supporting well-being. I think obviously mental health resources are a must-have for companies to be offering their people, full stop, but it's often a very big leap for an employee, and there's a lot of steps to get to a place where you're getting that support. And often at work, we need help strategizing on what is my path forward, what is that action plan for me to find the resilience to keep going. And so what's interesting about that statistic is that the same people that were coming to us for stress and burnout were also still focused on how do I continue to develop in my role. So those two things are not separate. They can coexist. And I think all of us can relate to that. We each probably had a very different set of stressful circumstances that we were dealing with, but that didn't impact, our drive to continue to grow. And I think that's where companies really have to figure out, like, how do we offer in a remote environment development opportunities for everyone and still create, as Shahina was talking about, this connection. I honestly don't think anyone has figured this out. I think this is why we're seeing this, the Great Resignation happening. People often think that the grass is greener somewhere else, but I just think that companies, there's going to be a lot of innovation coming out of this period, but companies are still trying to figure out, if I can't chit chat with someone in the kitchen and get the endorphin, the release of endorphins from that, and then go back and do my work, then what is the solution in place of that? And I honestly think that we've tried everything and we haven't yet landed on it. So it's going to be like a complete transformation that we go through to help figure out, what is it that employees are going to require now? And I do think it's going to be centered on this development, this skill building that Shahina was just talking about at every single stage of the employee life cycle, regardless of their title or tenure at the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd like to get your thoughts on go back to continue with the Great Resignation. What from your viewpoint, what parts of the workforce did it hit hardest, do you think? And what were some of the drivers of the Great Resignation?
I think a big driver of it is what I was just talking about, which is stress and burnout. If your company, I think most people, the pandemic for them became a vicious cycle of working longer hours, not having the opportunity to unplug. I personally have experienced that, where, getting on the subway to go home. When I lived in New York, I no longer even live where I lived at the beginning of the pandemic. Everything has changed, but there's no longer that separation for people. And that led to large increases in stress and burnout. And people are looking for their companies to align with their personal values. Ruth said this at the beginning. Everything comes down to an individual sense of belonging. I think everything that we talk about today could all tie back to belonging. And how do we cultivate this internally inside our organizations so that people have trust in their leadership, they believe that they have a place within the company, and that their needs are going to be met. And so I think that that's the requirement going forward, and that's the challenge ahead of us, that this is what people are going to be looking for. And I honestly think that coaching serves, because I keep saying that HR has been tasked with solving all the world's problems. I think that coaching is an example of something that's very individualized. It helps people solve their problems that are separated just from the organization. And that's one of these solutions that companies are turning to help them through this period.
Mm-hmm. Shahina, what are your thoughts about how the Great Resignation is impacting the workforce, and what do you think are some of the drivers, given the industry that you're in?
I think being part of the technology industry, I think we've always had to fight for talent. And that only got enhanced as we went into the pandemic scenario, because all the enterprises wanted to go digital, and that's the business we are in. So talent was, very much the talent that we had was what the market needed as well. But that said, I think what we are also realizing is that, through the pandemic, I think people started looking at their work and the work lives little differently. They started questioning what they are doing, and they started looking for more purpose and more meaning of the work that they were doing in the context of the lives that they were leading. And I think some of that also so when the existential questions started coming up, because of the reflection time that was available through the pandemic, I think it also made people change some of the things that they were normally doing, and they wanted to pursue different paths. So I think that's how I would look at what's contributing to the Great Resignation primarily. But I also feel that it's something which can be reversed, given the focus that we can bring about, and companies can start bringing about that focus on connections. I firmly believe in that. And I think, the more authentic selves that we are as an organization, and we are able to, connect with the individuals. And I completely agree. This is one person at a time, the more easier it will be to, attract talent and retain talent.
Mm-hmm. What does the Great Resignation, what does this say about the relationship between workers and companies? Obviously there's a shift going on. What else do you see beyond that obvious point? Ruth, would like to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think Sarah had alluded to this earlier about how it's changed who's in the driver's seat. That employers used to have this mentality that people want to come work for me. People want to be in our company. And now, through interviewing, I've had very similar experiences where, I'm trying to interview the candidate and they're trying to interview me just as much, where it used to be the other way around, where you could leave the last 15 minutes for questions. And now they want the same amount of time to interview you on how are you going to onboard me in a remote environment? How does my what's development look like in your organization? And where could I potentially be in the next 2 years? What benefits do you have so that I can have work-life balance, so that I can balance all the things and demands that I have in my personal life, now with my career. And so I think that's been the biggest change is, and I think employers are struggling. I see leaders struggling with this conversation where they're like, but wait a minute, I'm in the driver's seat. And there's this almost a little bit of a fight for who really is in the driver's seat. And I don't know that all hiring leaders have accepted that the Great Resignation has changed this, and that we do need to allow just as much time for them to interview us and to make that decision. And then, I think even with recruiting, just staying on this point that we're having to move faster because they're not applying to one job. They're actually talking to multiple companies. And if you don't move with speed, you're going to lose your best candidate. Because by the time you go through your 7-8 interview process that you used to have, they've already gotten 3 offers in hand. And so you've got to come at this with speed. You've got to come at this with understanding what you can do to provide for them and what they want. And you got to come to the table with your best offer because everybody else is.
Mm-hmm. And Sarah Waltman, what are you seeing in your industry? Are you seeing similar things or something different?
Definitely similar. And I think you can kind of wrap that up into the great divide. So I still think very much that there's where the direction that we're going forward in as what employees expect. And then where we still have a lot of employers and legacy individuals within these organizations that are very much saying when we come back to normal or when we start back to the office on the 22nd, and there's still very much this idea that here in a few weeks, everything will reset to the way it was before. And the reality of that is that normal didn't work for a lot of people for a long time. And what you're seeing now is they realize that they want to curate their own experience and have control of how they work versus being controlled when they come to an organization. So it's very different. We're seeing that particularly as we fight the war for talent right now, with a lot of the same talent segments being the most in demand, especially those in technology. Employees that want to know about how they're going to be able to own their own journey, not how we're going to dictate what work is like for them. And they want that same flexibility. For some people, it may look like work from home. For others, it may look completely different, but they want to know that they have ownership of that. And we're here to support them that. And then the mutual contract is they'll give us their best. But there's still a very large divide of where we're at today, and all people in organizations supporting that new norm, which is very much about there's not a one size fits all.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I'm wondering is with the Great Resignation and companies need workers, are we going to see incentives, signing bonuses, so to speak, to get workers back into the fold, if not back to the office, but just as an employee? Are we going to see that? Shahina?
I think competitive compensation, certainly, that's I would say the most basic that an organization needs to factor in to attract talent. I would say apart from that, there's a lot many other things that the organization needs to look into to make it, a compelling offer for the candidate. And, those could be a variety of things depending on, what kind of talent the organization is seeking, the markets that the organization is, operating out of. For example, post-pandemic, I think all employees would like to know how much of focus holistically does the organization have on their wellness and, and the benefit strategies. All of those have become very, very important apart from just compensation. I think compensation has become like, a very, I would say a very preliminary discussion point rather than, okay, how are you going to skill me? How are you going to invest in my reskilling, especially for technology industry, So what kind of avenues are there for me to keep myself up to date, and I shouldn't be getting obsolete because the technology is changing fast. So those are the kind of conversations that we are seeing more and more. along with compensation while hiring talent.
Mhm. Sarah Sheehan, your thoughts on this? What are in the folks that are being coached? Does this come up about rehiring, getting leverage in the workforce?
Yeah, internal mobility is a big one that people come to talk with a coach, talk through with the coach. Like, how do I continue to gain the skills that I need, work on things like, executive presence, communication, things that really translate in the workplace. They want a partner to, someone may go through a manager training and then they work with their coach every week to really strengthen and sharpen those skills. But just from I feel like throughout the pandemic, I was having all these talks, even internally with, we support tens of thousands of employees. So we would have webinars around resilience and how to be a vulnerable leader. And, at the end of the day, I see all of this, one of you just said this, as like a huge opportunity. It's like the great re-engagement. All of this should have been happening. The pandemic forced it upon us. It really, we saw some of this. It was the pandemic, and it was also the murder of George Floyd. There were so many things that happened, the violence against the AAPI community. It's a reawakening for companies to start really understanding that employees are not cogs in a wheel. They are individuals who need a different set of supporting resources to do their best work. And, we're still in the thick of the mud trying to find our way out of it. But I think there's a huge opportunity in front of us to, as Shahina said, to lead authentically and to lean heavily into, sharing our own vulnerabilities and building cultures around connection, because it's really the only path forward in a virtual environment.
How long will the Great Resignation last? Will there be the Great Rehiring of 2022 or 2023? Do you think, Shahina?
I think from my personal experience, I think both are happening simultaneously. So the talent requirement is there. We have opportunities to fulfill. And I think there's an opportunity here in the sense that, because remote working and hybrid models have been adopted so extensively that, one need not be dependent on talent pool confined to a location or a geography. I think that's where the work innovation will happen as to, how do you go beyond a certain geography and, tap into the global talent base, to get work done. And how do you have therefore boundaries and perimeters, to manage that worker and the work getting done. I think, that would be an exciting outcome of all of this if it goes there. And I think it will go there because, we are only pushing the boundaries little by little. And I think it's bound to happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's turn to COVID and vaccines. How should HR departments craft vaccine mandates for employees, given we have people who have gotten the vaccine and then there's people who are vaccine hesitant, reluctant? Ruth, how do you how has it worked in your company?
Yeah, so I'll share how we have handled this at McKesson. What helps with McKesson is we are a government contractor. So with the Biden policy around COVID vaccines, we have to use this. It is a policy if we are going to be a federal government contractor, which we are. So I think it's important to be very clear about the why. I think it's important to leave out the political debate around, should you get it, should you not get it, who's getting it, who's not, and just be very clear about, for us, this is a mandate that we have to abide by. We cannot ignore this. I think it's important to be specific around dates to help people understand. For our organization, you have to have your vaccine by a certain date. Your role you will be eliminated from the organization if you choose not to be vaccinated, because this is the guidelines that we have to work with. I think it's important to help people understand when they need to get their shots, if they choose to get them, so that they can have both shots within a certain time period. So be very clear in the communication. But I think it's important to communicate just enough, to not over communicate it, because I think the over communication of this becomes political. And so I think it's important to be very clear, help them understand the guidelines, help them understand the dates if they choose to do this, help them understand the consequences and when this will occur if they choose not to, and leave it alone. Create forms for people to ask questions. But I think, talking about it on a regular basis, pushing people to do, make a decision that maybe isn't what they want to make. I think that is hindering organizations and becoming very disruptive. So I would just be very clear and concise, and then leave it alone and allow people to ask questions.
Sarah Waltman, your thoughts on this?
I have to echo what Ruth said. I think in most all messages, starting with the why is extremely important. And I think also as a government contractor, that's a massive part. One of the the main reasons we're doing this as well. I would also add it's because we care about our employees, and anywhere you can map back, we want to provide you an opportunity to further your health and safety. We want to make sure that you're equipped and providing them the time and space to do it. Some of that could be by using, company paid time to get the shots, and making sure also that managers are equipped with some ways to support their employees who might choose to make different decisions, which is fine, and how we would support them. So I really think, in addition to the mandate, it is about caring and making sure that we offer our employees an opportunity to be as safe and healthy as possible. And some people may choose different decisions that are best for them, and also supporting that. And a lot of this ties back to, a lot of Sarah's points, very interested in her company around coaching and making sure people have the opportunity to talk about some of the things that might concern them, and really make a plan for themselves. So I think it's a difficult thing to do, but I think starting with the why is really important. So I really echo what Bruce said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that leads to my next question about how does a company make its environment a better place, a good place for employees, a place where they can have work-life balance. What are some of the trends that you're seeing in this area and that you're actually practicing at your companies? Shahina, tell us about what's going on.
So we embarked on a journey of, just getting away from normal engagement studies, satisfaction surveys. We said, let's go a little deeper and understand, what makes our employees happy. And, the credit for this goes to our group organization, being part of a large group conglomerate and with diverse interests. The whole focus was, does happiness differ for someone working in an IT industry versus someone working in a traditional manufacturing setup? And when we undertook that study, it really was very interesting to see that, the tenets that drive happiness for an employee of any organization, they're very common, irrespective of the business segment or, the industry that they are in. And I think, in that, a very important component for us is how does one, ensure that the employee is experiencing work-life balance. And that, I think, is a concept which is more beyond just initiatives. It's more about, what really is that individual, is that employee looking for, and are they finding it in the organization that they are part of. It could be, very common aspects like, are they getting the compensation that they're looking for, to something more meaningful. Am I able to contribute to aspects that I'm passionate about? Am I finding a community in the organization that I can interact with, a community of people who have common interests? Do I have the control on the work that I'm doing? And, do I have the flexibility to be focused only on outcomes rather than being driven by, standards, which may not make sense in an outcome-driven environment? So I think, those are aspects that I feel contributes. And, that's why we had to bring about this concept of happiness, because it's beyond just satisfaction, it's beyond engagement. It's basically, understanding each individual's requirements and trying to address it by focusing on few common tenets that drives happiness.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're just got a few more questions here. I want to go through, and I wanted to turn to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the past year, we saw the murder of George Floyd, and a call for companies to make bigger commitments in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so my basic question is where do you think there's been progress on this front, and what efforts also remain to be done to to make good on these promises? Sarah Waltman, I'd like you to address this.
Yeah, we were in the heat of our journey, and I think we've continued to lean in even harder in this space. And I believe that some of the standout areas that we've been successful is we have conversations and understanding throughout our organization, which allows individuals to share different stories and things that affect them personally with their peers, and get feedback and allyship. We also established numerous employee resource groups. Where I think that we still have an opportunity is on the equity side, and making sure that long-term, not just having activities, but really truly providing that equity and those opportunities for individuals to continue to grow. I think that a lot of that goes back to making sure that there is equitable access to the different resources that help individuals grow and develop. I think we've talked about that in a couple of different ways. Making sure that we're looking at increasing our candidate slate diversity, looking at untapped diverse talent pools. One example is disabilities. Individuals with disabilities now have more opportunities to participate equally in the workforce with the establishment of remote work. So it's extremely exciting that we should be able to offer more opportunities to people with disabilities and including them in the workplace. So I think it's really brought about a much needed accountability to organizations. And now I think it is, it's just, we have to deliver and follow through on the things we've committed to, and take it from just tactical activities to actually making meaningful change in our organizations.
Mm-hmm. Ruth, your thoughts on this, please.
Yeah, I feel like, we have made strides, but I don't know that the strides that have been made are enough, that we will have to continue. I shared earlier this weekend, I was reading a McKinsey article about women in the workplace in 2021. And they talk about a lot around women, but they're also talking about people of color, women of people of color. And one of the stats, for every 100 men that were promoted into a manager role, only 86 women had the same development opportunity. And out of the 86 women, there's about a 30% less for people of color. And so this is where we start our benchmark, is going into a management role. And so although you've seen a lot of organizations hire diversity at the very senior levels, that's one job. The impact is really going to be when we can start hiring more diversity at that frontline manager so that they can have the opportunity to continue to grow and develop. And then we can increase those all the way up through the senior leaderships. And so, from all the reading that I've done around diversity, we still have a lot of opportunity here. And I just hope that organizations don't hire a few and then they feel like they've checked a box. This is not a check the box work. This is how do we really create meaningful change that will continue in the future. And so I really do believe that we've got to get more people of color in management roles, at those very basic management roles, so that they can become the pipeline for the senior level roles in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We have about 4 more minutes. And so I think, and I'd like you to, as we wrap this up, I'd like all of you to address sort of this mega issue of the role of HR moving forward. And the basic question is, do you think that HR will have a bigger voice, more influence, let's say, on company policies, on C-suite decisions moving forward? What do you see as the future of HR as in terms of having a big hand in shaping corporate policy? Let's begin with you, Ruth.
So I hope so. I think there's a lot of times we look at history where moments happen in history and you see a large movement, and then you look 5 years later, 10 years later, and we've not continued with that movement. So, I think that in the short term, yes, HR will continue to be a voice that's heard louder than ever. In terms of will this last? I don't know. I do hope so, though. I do hope that I hope businesses will understand that HR's voice is about the people and helping businesses achieve their goals through people. It's not just for the sake of having a voice in HR, but
right.
What do we need to do to inspire and engage our people? How do we retain them? How do we get them? And so, I hope businesses do see the value that HR is bringing, and how are we enabling our businesses to meet their goals and exceed their goals by way of people? I hope that it will continue.
Mm-hmm. Shahina, your thoughts?
I believe that HR will play 2 major roles, in the days and years going forward. One would be the role of an innovator as work and the concept of work changes and the concept of worker changes. This is where, HR will be called upon to bring out innovations to manage these 2 important dimensions. And the other role that HR would be called upon to play is to be that constant coach for the organization. Being a coach also means that, HR is obviously understanding the business, how the business is evolving, and is able to provide strategies to guide the business in the correct direction as far as the work and worker is concerned. So I think these would be the 2 important roles that HR will be called upon to play, has already been called upon to play. And I think that will continue in the years to come.
Sarah Sheehan, how do you see the future of HR in 30 seconds?
I think it's the single most important role inside an organization. Mm-hmm. And I think Shahina's right. It's going to evolve more into a strategic partnership. I think a lot of HR leaders have functioned in this role if they're inside the right company, but more and more you're going to see them take on a bigger leadership role inside companies and not just talk about benefits.
Okay, and Sarah Waltman, to wrap it up, what are your thoughts?
I would challenge all the CEOs and ask them what role they want to play. And I believe a massive differentiator between the companies that will win in the future will be how they leverage HR and how they maximize their people.
Okay. Well, it's 3 o'clock on the dot. We came right under the wire. There's maybe one other question I wanted to ask, but thank you so much for your input and your insight into the state of HR, where things are going, and the trends. This has been very illuminating.
Well, and now we have 30 minutes left for the Q&A portion of the program, and we've got a lot of questions from the audience. I can see certainly a lot of questions about following on about employee retention and so on. I want to thank all of you for participating in this and HR Trends in 2021, and thank our sponsors, Bravely and Achievers. Once again, in case you missed it at the beginning of the event, I wanted to let you know about one of our upcoming webinars that may be of interest to you, called Judging the Relevance of Skills Credentials. It's hosted in partnership with AARP. The webinar will take place next Tuesday, October 26th, and I'm putting a link in the chat session so you could register. Thanks for looking into that. With that out of the way, at this time, we'll be taking some questions from our audience, and you've already submitted a bunch. So Pat, check out the Q&A section there and fire some of those away at our audience. I'll be back in half an hour to thank you again.
Okay. Okay, let's turn to the Q&A, some of the questions that we've gotten. Now, one asks, if you have vaccine requirements for in-person gatherings, how are you managing the feeling of being excluded for those employees who choose not to be vaccinated? Shahina, tell us what you're doing, what your company is doing, please.
We have yet to put vaccine mandates because, like I said, we are working hybrid models still. But, we do ensure that, there's a lot of discussion that's going on as to how do we implement this. Should we choose to get back to, let's say, 3 out of 5 days working out of office, which we haven't crossed that bridge yet. But essentially, we do get together for, knowledge sharing, for leadership meetings, for, all such, like project reviews and meetings of such kind. And there we ensure that, it's basically voluntary. If people want to be there in person, because we have digital tools available, which are being leveraged. So we kind of have kept it flexible, but I'm sure we'll go down that path of discussion soon as to, when mandates are required, how do we cross that bridge? But at this point, we are obviously spending a lot of time communicating the importance of getting vaccinated. And that we see is having an impact.
Sarah Waltman.
Coming from an organization with so many global individuals, wherein I haven't even met all of my team members in person, even pre-COVID. We do a lot of activities, team building online. We might have a day where we cook online together, share a recipe, and then come back and try it out. We do Christmas parties or different holiday celebrations online. Number one, to respect all the different types of celebrations we have across the world and learn. And then also as team building. Recently, we had our large, what we call DS World, which allows thousands of dental professionals and our organization to come together. And there was individuals who weren't able to attend that event. And we had virtual options. We did our breakouts virtually. We made sure that different parts of our celebration were offered virtually. We were very conscious of the fact that we had virtual participants and including them and making sure that they could also ask questions. And as a virtual participant for a lot of our different events, I always feel completely included. And luckily, I don't have to worry about what pants I'm wearing. I can wear sweatpants in comparison to others, but I always feel more than included in our virtual events. And I think as long as you're conscious of the fact that there's people who are on a screen, it works.
Great, thank you. Next question. How can companies balance the need for better pay, benefits, and working conditions with the need for the company to make a profit? Ruth?
A great question. It's a complex question as well. So, I think organizations do understand that they can't even think about meeting their goals or even making a profit without having employees to do the work. So, in our distribution centers, we have customers, physicians that are expecting products so that they can, serve the community. We've got to get their product out. And so, I think executives are very thoughtful about, okay, if we even want to make a profit, we've got to have people. And so we've got to have the benefits, the pay, the working conditions so that we can continue to do that. So, it's a balance. And it's definitely a topic that is coming up more often with the Great Resignation. We were talking earlier about bonuses. I don't know that our distribution centers offered sign-on bonuses pre-COVID, but now that's a norm, because if you're competing with Amazon distribution and FedEx distribution, if they're doing it, then we've got to do that to get talent as well. So I think it's definitely a balancing act, but companies are there to make a profit, but we also need people.
Okay, anybody else would like to weigh in on that particular question? How can companies balance the need for better pay, benefits, and working conditions with the need to make profit? And Sarah Sheehan, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I feel this as a growing company right now. The salary bands that we had set for roles have changed over the course of the last year. There are just certain realities that I think companies are facing that we didn't necessarily anticipate. We went from a situation where it felt like everyone was going to stay in their jobs till the end of time because the future was uncertain, and then the opposite actually happened, and we're a growing company, so we have to hire, and it's a very competitive market right now. So I think from our perspective, we realize that we've gone fully remote. So there are cost savings in that. And how can we reallocate those savings into our people and the resources that we offer them? And that's just one way that we've tried to reframe it. But I think there's always this tension, and forever has been, which is why HR has been seen as a cost center and no longer is, thank God. But now we're starting to realize, business outcomes are 100% attached to how we support and compensate our people. So I do think it all comes out in the wash, so to speak, if you shift your perspective on it. Investing in your people means greater business outcomes.
Okay. Next question. How are you seeing managers coping with being shorthanded with employees at the moment? Does this go as far as curbing the company's growth plans because of this? To give us a sense of what's going on. Sarah Waltman.
I think that stepping back when you have an open position right now as a manager and asking yourself, are there different ways that work could get done? So we haven't always optimized some of the digital options that our customers expect internally. So sometimes it's rethinking, if we have less individuals to help us with the work, are there different ways that we could still achieve the same outcomes? Is some of that work still necessary? What are our priorities? What will drive the strategy? And so that may not be the answer in all cases, especially when you go more into a production setting. But I think it's a time for us to also challenge the status quo and say, we don't always have to have one brick in, one brick out. Are there different ways we could distribute this work Are there new innovative ways that we could accomplish the same task? And are we even working on the right things? I think there's been what I always like to call a lot of scrap metal in our work, and a major opportunity for us to challenge ourselves about how we get work done. And that is not definitely not meant to be a one-size-fits-all answer, but it's an opportunity for us as HR to coach, look at the organizational structure, and not always try to build individual empires in the organization, but disperse, rethink the work, better collaborate, and really challenge ourselves.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Does it become part of the role of HR to convey a company's sense of purpose and to make sure that top management keeps this in mind? Is that HR's role? Who would like to jump in and address that?
I would like to say it's part of what HR should also do, but I don't think it's singularly on HR to do that. I think that that's a commitment from the entire leadership team to model those desired behaviors and to serve as ambassadors for the organization's culture, not just HR's job. I also don't know that HR should necessarily be, the old personnel department and walking around and, correcting people. I think that comes more of having a culture of coaching within your organization. If your leaders are modeling it, if you've developed a coaching culture, that can better cascade through the organization versus just HR kind of holding the stick and saying, this is our culture, I own the culture. I think that that's more of an organizational responsibility and has to be modeled starting with the senior most leaders.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Our next question. One of the attendees said, one of the issues not addressed is the challenges facing working caregivers as they are struggling with issues also not addressed: lack of childcare, lack of flexibility, lack of manager support from employees with children to those with aging parents. These needs are complex and ongoing. What are your thoughts about that issue? Let's start with Ruth.
So, early on in COVID, this was a concern, a challenge for every parent. And so one of the things that McKesson rolled out that is here to stay is a policy that's called Flex for Your Day. And it's that short and simple. And what that allows our office, of course, we can't do this in our distribution centers for our products, but for our office employees, it really puts the time back in their hand. So to give you an example, yesterday, my day was really busy and I really wanted to make sure I could go to the gym, but my daughter was home and the gym daycare didn't open until 8. So I went to the gym from 8 to 9:30. I didn't need to tell anybody. I didn't need to run it by anybody. I flex for my day, and my leader is responsible for ensuring that I meet my performance goals. So as long as I'm meeting those expectations of my performance goals, I own my schedule, and it can change every single day depending on what I need. So I can go and get my daughter from school if I need to. I can take her to the doctor. I can spend time with her, quite frankly, if I have the time during the day that I'm like, I'm going to take these 2 hours and go outside and play with her. And I will work on this later on. I think this has been a real benefit to our employees in terms of helping them with that flexibility, whether it's, children, aging parents, their spouse, or quite frankly, just taking time out for themselves, because we often want to forget about ourselves and put everybody else first, but we also need time. So Flex for Your Day is here to stay at McKesson, and I think that our employees have really valued that.
Sarah Sheehan, does that issue come up with a lot of the folks that you coach about balancing family life, childcare with work?
Yes. I think this is also one of those silver linings of the pandemic, where finally women in particular have been able to express the challenges associated with motherhood and working full time. And then for many of us, not having childcare through this. I like I said before, I was a new mother without childcare for the first 15 months of my daughter's life, which was a wild ride, but something I wouldn't trade for the world. But I think the pandemic isn't over. And I think that's a really important point to drive home. And different people have different levels of comfort in terms of sending their children back to school or sending their child who's too young to wear a mask to daycare, and being willing to make those accommodations based on, I have someone on my team who has a spouse that is at risk. And so they take the utmost precautions today, even as it feels like things are starting to loosen up. Those are just examples of how companies really need to, again, focus on the individual and provide whatever flexibility they need to support them, through this ongoing moment that, for many of us seems like it's never ending, especially if you have young children. I do think that the ability for children 5 and older to get vaccinated will be a game changer for a lot of parents in this country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Our next question. How does this red hot talent market possibly benefit new grads and young people in general? Who would like to jump in?
I can take that up.
Okay.
So I think, the need for talent, has kind of, made companies realize that there is no point in looking at getting 100% ready talent from the market. So there has to be an investment mentality, which means that, you look for attitude more than, 100% readiness of skills. And that's where the focus on soft skills and, all the attributes that are required to be successful at work, that's forcing, organizations, and many organizations, inclusive of technology organizations, to focus on skill building, to build that talent pipeline rather than, just being dependent on the market to hire talent from. And I think that in a way is benefiting young talent coming out of colleges and other such institutions. Depending on the skill requirements, the match is done. And then there's a lot of investment in getting the talent ready for the roles, and which I think is a great approach to have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next question, how do you help people who like the socialization aspects of the office, but are faced with colleagues who want to work 100% remotely? I guess what's being asked here is, how do you juggle these? How do you bring together these two these two types of workers? So that there's a sense of belonging, a sense of synergy, I think is what they're asking. Sarah Waltman, give it a shot.
Yeah, I think it's carefully curating experiences that maximize both, and making sure that you model as a leader, no bias to either party. I even encourage sometimes that senior leaders not attend some of the bigger events in person, so that there's a balance where we also have a senior leader presence that's virtual and one that's in person. So I think it's a careful curation. I can't say that every time that everyone will feel or like that particular experience, but you have to think that there was probably individuals that had additional stress coming into the office pre-COVID because it maybe didn't fit what helped them get to their best work, and they were trying to force participation in that particular environment and it wasn't working for them. So I think, as different locations are allowed, having that office open. I love what was said earlier as a destination. Those who work at their best when they're in that environment, having them being able to participate there. And then having that option for individuals who do their best work elsewhere, open too. And then it's carefully curating in the middle when there is more of those team type interventions, that you can still have fun if there's a person on the screen and there's a person or a group of people in person. And just making sure that you're careful about including those individuals. I think it can start with each of us as leaders modeling that. And then, I mean, that really respects how everyone gets their work done. And might not be the best in-person party for those who are having to share that space with someone who's virtual, but it definitely gives a more middle ground for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, anyone else? Okay, our next question is about a topic we talked about, diversity and inclusion. And the question is, after a year and a half of focusing on diversity and inclusion, how can the momentum be maintained going into 2022, both in strategy and tactics? Shahina, any thoughts on this?
I think, as an organization, I think a lot gets done to promote diversity, equity, inclusion within the organization. I think what it'll take, and I would say that, companies haven't embarked on this journey. The focus on sustainability has brought about those kind of initiatives as well, is where organizations start partnering and looking at, how to address equities in a social environment, and that's where organizations have to play much larger roles, whether it's, aspects like healthcare, aspects like education, aspects like, skill building, and I think, that's going to address a lot of this on a long-term basis. And I think, that's an exciting outcome of sustainability initiatives. And I think more and more organizations will go down that path. That'll make it more long-term. The efforts will become more long-term, in terms of, how it's not just limited to within the organization, but it addresses broader societal issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ruth, I'd like you to jump in here and give us your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was sharing this earlier, that I think that organizations need to get very committed in promoting diversity at that entry manager level and all the way up. And so you hear a lot about, they've hired CEOs or senior vice presidents, and that's great, but that doesn't create the succession plan and the pipeline for all of the other roles. And so I think we've just got to really think about, just even at your entry level manager roles, moving up, we need to have a pipeline of diverse talent, so that the future, we're not always behind and trying to ensure that we've got a slate of successors, sorry about that, that's diverse. So that's where I hope organizations continue to focus. And again, not to check the box. Diversity and inclusion is actually on our scorecard. So this is tied directly to our bonuses as leaders. And so I think this is, if you measure something, people do what you measure. And so I love that, although I'd wish that it was more, because it's the right thing to do, but you can't take a chance that you'll end up going backwards. And so making it part of their bonus structure, people will be thoughtful about it until it becomes a habit, until we no longer have to incentivize the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Pat, I just wanted to add that one of the things that we hear most clearly in our coaching sessions with underrepresented minorities is the need to create these safe spaces for them, because often once an employee of color, as an example, gets hired into the organization, they very quickly figure out that there's actually not a sense of belonging for them that gets built within, whatever role that they're sitting in. And so they have been invited into the organization, but the organization is actually not set up to support their needs, or they don't feel comfortable raising their voice, or they're not getting the same opportunities. And so one of the things that we've done at Bravely is we recently rolled out identity matching within our coaching platform. And this is in beta. We've rolled it out with a couple of clients, and we'll be rolling it out broadly across the entire, all the employees that have access. But it was because, we were getting asked for this, right? So if, an employee feels like they have a unique set of circumstances because, as an example, they're a Black woman inside the walls of a company, they want to be coached by someone that can relate to the experience that they're having. So I do think it's important to note that, one thing will continue is that this work is always going to be hard, and that probably won't go away. And that's where the real commitment comes in and the investment. But I think focusing on, maybe the unknowns or the things that you might not be aware of, to make sure that those people have opportunities to share openly and have the psychological safety to do so. And as an example, they can do that in a coaching session where no one knows what they're talking about.
Okay. We have about 2 more minutes, and I just wanted to get in one more question and maybe just one answer to conclude. And the question is, do you think there's a growing connection between career path expectations on the part of the employees and succession planning by employers? Who would like to quickly jump in and take this on? Connection between career path expectations by employees and succession planning.
I can take a stab at the answer. I think absolutely. I think an important factor, like we've talked about, this kind of custom approach and not having a one size all, is allowing employees to own their own journey. I think that where the employer should serve a role is being curious about that, and then supportive with the tools, resources for those individuals to reach their aspirations, which may change. Individuals could experience something within the organization and really go in a different direction based on that. So I think it's really more about the curiosity that the organization has about individuals' aspirations, and making sure that their job is more to support people in being able to own their own journey and have managers that are supportive of those individuals' journey, versus expected everyone to follow a linear approach, or to be typecasted into different roles that may not fit them, or for the organization not to keep up on the same pace. So I think when you release that ownership to the individual, it actually helps them pace themselves appropriately. I don't know that the organization could ever match everyone's aspirations. So I think it's really giving that ownership for the individuals.
Okay. Okay, our time, I think we're almost, yeah, it's 3:28. And that concludes our questioning. Thank you to all the panelists for your insight into all these questions.
Yes, indeed, Patrick. I want to thank you and each of our wonderful speakers. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciated how you moved the ball in terms of taking these issues we've been talking about for 19 months and onto new ground. And as Sarah Sheehan said, the pandemic isn't over as much as we'd like it to be, and we need to appreciate what our coworkers are going through. I also like what Sarah Waltman said about how we all have a lot of scrap metal in our work. That's a great new expression. I'm hoping to use that one myself sometime soon. Thanks also to our partners, Bravely and Achievers, and to all of you for participating today. Before we sign off, I want to remind you one more time about the upcoming webinar that's closely related to skilling, reskilling, upskilling, next Tuesday, October 26th. The link in the chat section to register will take you there, and you can find out more about it. The challenge ahead is to make sure we're not missing out on exceptional talent and opportunities. So thank you all, and stay well.